You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about a dad who found his daughter's killer. The case of Ali Kemp. Now, when someone so dear to you is suddenly taken, what would you do to bring them to justice? Roger Kemp discovered just how far he would go to avenge his daughter. His actions would be the first time this method was used to catch a killer. In a case like no other, Ali Kemp shined brightly and is still in the hearts and minds of many, even today. I also want to thank our sponsor, Care Of, who makes it possible for me to make these videos. Now, they are a wellness brand that I personally get my vitamins from. Care Of makes it incredibly easy to find what you need. All you need to do is take a 5-minute quiz and figure out what you want to focus on, and then it gets sent straight to your door. It's as simple as that, and you can change the type of vitamins you need or you want every month if you want to do so. This month, I wanted to focus more on my hair, my skin, and my energies. So Care Of recommended fish oil, probiotic blend, keratin, and vegetarian collagen. And I keep my adorable little packets right next to my blender so I remember to take them every morning. For a busy girl, this is a complete necessity. And Care Of gives me the opportunity to take better care of my body without having to spend a ton of time on the best options looking around. They just do all of that for me and know what my body needs. If this sounds like something that would be helpful to you, then I recommend going to the link below and using the code BROOKEM for 50% off your first order. I highly recommend it. They make it super easy. You don't have to go to the drugstore and kind of look around at all the vitamins and figure out which ones you need, how many you have to take. It's just all in one condensed, cute package. So make sure to go there if it sounds like something that you want to experience, and you can get 50% off with the code BROOKEM. And if you don't know, it is my absolute passion to tell these stories. I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so, and so if that's something you'd like to support me in, all you have to do is subscribe, leave a nice comment down below, and possibly give this a thumbs up. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2002 in Kansas, and the Kemp family lived in Leawood. This was Roger and Kathy and their children, who were 19-year-old Ali and their 2 sons, one of which was named Tyler, and the other one I could not find the name of, unfortunately. But Ali, whose full name was Alexandra, was actually a graduate of high school and was going to college at K-State University. No matter what year you asked about when it came to Ali's grades, they were always straight A's. She also loved being involved in every extracurricular program that you could think of, including soccer, volleyball, basketball, any sports she loved. In college, she was majoring in mass communications, and she was also a member of the Pi Beta Phi. She was a popular girl with a lot of friends who adored her. She even volunteered at a church and in the community, and her family thought she was this ambitious, hardworking, beautiful, loving young woman. Ali also had a boyfriend at the time named Phil Howes, and they were a couple that no one really knew if they were on again or off again, and it was just kind of that kind of thing. They'd been dating for 5 years since high school, so this was pretty normal for this teenage relationship that had started so early. They were kind of growing up, experiencing things, figuring out if they were good together, but they were still going strong even though they were both going to 2 separate colleges, because she was going to K-State and Phil was going to KU, or the University of Kansas. They were about an hour and a half away from each other, but they were still in love. Both teens had survived their first year at college, and they had come back for the summer to Leawood to work at the neighborhood pools. Of course, they came back for their family, but the pool was just kind of a job where they could earn some extra money while they were away from college. But on June 18th, Ali went to her shift at this neighborhood pool that wasn't too far away from her family home, and she was taking care of cleaning the water, making sure everybody who went to this pool was safe, was clean, was, just taking care of the pool as well, and she was just in charge of basically overlooking this area. A lot of the time she was working there alone because this wasn't a busy area, and her brother Tyler also worked as a pool attendant at this same pool, and so he would often go after her shift was over and kind of take over it for her. So they would, exchange a quick little talk. She would go home and he would stay afterwards. So on this day, the weather was quite overcast, and that meant that not a lot of people chose to go swimming, and so it really was just Ali there. But Tyler showed up around 5 p.m. for his shift, and he went looking for Ali but was finding her nowhere. Her purse and her cell phone were still on the table where she would sit and just watch the area when she wasn't busy cleaning, and that's when Tyler decided to call their mother and tell her what was going on, that he couldn't locate Ali. I mean, this is something that they did every single day, switching off these shifts, and Ali was always there. Their father, Roger, had just gotten home from work, and that is when he decided to head over to the pool to help Tyler search for Ali, and that is when he began to go into the pool room where the pumps were, where maintenance workers would go to work on the pool, and he was searching kind of in the dark, looking around, because Tyler hadn't done a very thorough job. He was a teenage boy, and he had kind of gotten spooked upon not seeing her and kind of immediately called his parents. So his father really was the one who was doing the intense searching. It was completely dark inside this pool house. It was a mess inside, and Roger looked through every inch all the way to the back behind the pumps, and he wasn't finding anything. But just as he was about to leave, he noticed something that no parent should have to see. And when he went over, he lifted the tarp off of where he saw the human foot, and he found his daughter. She was lying face down on the concrete floor, and she was bloody, but her back was still warm. And around 5:30, a 911 call was placed. Roger was talking on the phone saying that he believed his daughter had been murdered, and when he was asked if she was still breathing, he said he couldn't tell. That is when the ambulance was called, and he just was heard on the phone call asking Ali to stay with him, begging her to come back to him. Ali was black and blue and severely beaten. Her hair was matted with blood, and she was naked from the waist down. Her sports bra had been pushed up under her arms, and her t-shirt was actually wrapped around her neck. An ambulance arrived to rush Ali to the hospital, but unfortunately, she was pronounced dead once they got there. They were unable to save her, and her family and her boyfriend were by her side at this time, but the investigators were at the pool cordoning off the area, and the Deputy Police Chief Craig Hill began to go around to survey the scene. And that is when he immediately noticed that a struggle had happened. It looked like a grenade had gone off in this pool house, and Ali's flip-flops were in two completely different places. There was blood spatter all over the room. A tube of antiseptic ointment was on the floor with the cap open, and this was from the first aid bag which had been removed from the wall. The autopsy was done by a Dr. Michael Handler, and he found that Ali had both of her eyes blackened. She had bruises on her body. Her lip was cut open. Her fingers were scratched. Her fingernails were broken off, and her left hand had broken fingers. She had fought off this attacker, but the two lacerations on the back of her head showed that she had fought until she was hit over the head enough where she couldn't anymore. Dr. Handler reported that the injuries to the back of her head could be from a fall, but it also could be from her head being beaten against the floor. The worst part, though, was she had been strangled by ligature and manually, or by object and by hands. This had been over the course of 10 to 16 minutes. The hemorrhaging found that this was also not continuous. This killer had strangled her and stopped and continued again over and over. There had been times when Ali was left catching her breath only to be strangled again. It appeared as though something had been put around her neck as the killer stepped or put his weight on her shoulder blades, her collarbones, and then he pulled up on her head. This beautiful soul had used every possible option to survive, but unfortunately that wasn't enough. DNA was then taken from her body and her clothes, as well as on the tube of antiseptic that they had found open nearby. While her family went to the morgue and her friends held a vigil for her, investigators were looking for any possible suspects in the area, and Roger actually refused to leave Ali's side because he no longer wanted her to be alone. At this point, they did have a funeral, and 1,400 people came to mourn the loss of such a special girl. Meanwhile, the media was going wild for a murder where a father had found his daughter murdered at a neighborhood pool. This place in Leawood was known to be an affluent place with big homes and low crime rates. Nobody had this happening ever. And this was big news, but it wasn't news because it would make a good story. Well, at least not to the community. To the community, everyone was demanding for this to be solved quickly, so it didn't happen again. They also began placing gifts at the Blue Valley High School where Ali had gone, and posters and letters as kind of a little memorial for her. Everyone in the community was more than willing to give interviews about what they saw, as well as just to talk about Ali. Everyone had good things to say, and they wanted to help out in any way they could. The Kemp family began to feel the support as well, and they said it seemed like everyone had kind of adopted Ali as their own child, fighting for her as if she was. That's when investigators were informed of Ali's boyfriend, Phil. And he had been with her that morning at the pool. You see, he had worked until around 12 p.m. and she had come to take over his shift just as her brother, at 5 p.m. came over to take hers. But he claimed that she told him he didn't have to stay that day with her because they had a date later for that night, so she was going to work alone and would meet him later. Phil said that Ali had come to her at one point saying that working alone did make her scared, and that some of the lawn care workers would just stare at her, make her feel uncomfortable, and she was going to be working alone this day, but she said she felt safe enough, so Phil left. It was around 2 p.m. when he finally left, but the last call made from Ali's cell phone was to Phil, and he never answered or responded. Now this is why Phil became their first suspect, and Phil was brought in for questioning and said that that day after he had left his girlfriend, he actually went to another pool to hang out with some friends and then went to go and watch or play video games. Phil was more than willing to give DNA, but they hadn't gotten the DNA back from the crime scene yet to test it against his, so this is kind of at a standstill. But Ali's father, Roger, was talked to and said there was no way Phil had anything to do with it. He was a sweet, caring boy, and investigators also believed when they questioned him, he was in shock and didn't know anything. When his alibi was confirmed, it was found that not only did he go to the hospital when Ali was there hoping to recover, he also went to her funeral, and then he led the group of people who were putting out posters demanding that the killer be identified. That's because there was another man that investigators had their eye on. The problem was they only had a sketch of him to go on. You see, when investigators were first looking at the crime scene, they went around and asked the crowd of people who had gathered their names and their phone numbers. All of the names were taken and they were looked through. They were asked if they had seen anything suspicious that day or prior, and that is when some lawn care workers actually came forward saying they had seen a very strange man lurking in the bushes by this pool with a video camera. They said that he was filming and watching girls. This was a day prior to the murder, but the day of the murder, they had seen him as well. That time, he was driving around the pool parking lot in a beige Ford pickup truck. Now, a sketch was created of a tall, thin, white man in his 30s, standing at 5'10" to 6 foot, with a heavy build, short brown hair, possibly wearing a blue jumpsuit uniform and a backwards cap. But there was also the possibility that there was another man who could be involved, because Ali had called someone else that day of the murder. This was traced back to a girl named Laurel. Now, she was brought in for questioning, and Laurel said that she had gone to the pool that day around 3 p.m. because Ali had asked her to. She asked her to come visit while she was at work all alone and just wanted to talk. But once Laurel got there, she began honking for Ali to come out. She was basically too lazy to get out of her car and wanted Ali to come to her to talk there. But Ali wasn't coming, and then she saw a man. This man waved at her, and she froze. She didn't know who this was, and she left, believing that this was possibly Ali's boss, and she didn't want to get Ali in trouble for getting someone to come and talk to her while she was at work. So she left, not ever seeing Ali that day. 2 hours later, Ali was found deceased, and investigators believed at this point that she was already dead by the time that Laurel arrived, and also that Laurel had seen her killer. You see, a name was never found for a man checking into the pool that day or for any maintenance workers to be working there. Laurel was then taken to the police department to create a composite sketch, and the problem was this was mostly computer generated and wasn't very good quality. And that is when sketch artist Lee Hammond, who had done hundreds of sketches for the local police at this time, including that of Precious Doe, which identified her, came forward. Lee had taken a break to be with her children, but when she saw all of this happening with Ali, she came forward to volunteer to create this sketch. That's when she drew the man that Laurel had seen that day, and flyers were then passed out by a whole group of people who were being led by Ali's boyfriend. These flyers said that this man was wanted for questioning and that he was believed to be a white male in his 30s, standing at 5'8" to 6 foot, heavyset with short brown hair. There was also a reward of $25,000 for information. This flyer was posted everywhere it could be in Kansas, and Phil even began putting the picture around the KU campus, which said for everybody to go and watch the America's Most Wanted episode that had just been created about Ali's case. It seemed as though the man who investigators thought was the suspect was actually being the biggest help in this case. He said, "This monster will do this again, and we need everyone's help to try to find him and bring him in." Now, investigators weren't 100% sure that the man the lawn care workers and the man Laurel had seen were the same man, especially because they hadn't identified either. They were similar, but they were not identical, and both witnesses hadn't seen him up close either, so they couldn't give the most amount of detail possible. The tips did begin to come in, though not many. Investigators did finally have something to go on. They also knew by this point that Ali had been killed somewhere between 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. between when her boyfriend left and Laurel arrived. But the DNA from the crime scene had also come back. However, this was not a match to anyone in the database. Although, investigators weren't giving up on the DNA just yet, because although they couldn't be matched to anyone in the database, that didn't mean they couldn't catch the killer, because they actually couldn't even place it in the database. You see, every piece of DNA that they had found was a mix of Ali's and this killer's, which made it impossible to be able to put it through CODIS or the database of DNA and link it to a criminal who was already in there. However, if they brought in the man who was the killer and got his DNA, they could match it that way. So there was still hope of using DNA to catch this killer. The problem was there were no suspects that even looked remotely suspicious in custody, and all of Ali's friends, family members, and her boyfriend had all been ruled out officially through DNA. A few months into the investigation, investigators started going through that list of names and numbers they had gotten from the pool that day. As horrific as it sounds, investigators knew that some killers do like to come back to the place that they had murdered to relive their kill or to be a part of the investigation. And so one by one, they began looking through these names, kind of just talking to the individuals, seeing if they could find anything suspicious or that linked them to Ali. And that is when they came to one man named Teddy Hoover. Now, Teddy agreed to speak to Sergeant Scott Hansen, and he said he was a self-employed pool maintenance contractor. He said he didn't know what he was doing that day, but he had nothing to do with this murder. And when he was asked for DNA, he said, "Yeah, I'll just talk to my lawyer and we'll get back to you after that." Now, because investigators had nothing against them, they did wait patiently, because a lot of people said flat out no when they asked them, actually, because they would say they didn't want Big Brother to have their DNA, and so if investigators didn't have a warrant or no reason to officially get that DNA, they just kind of let those people slide. And they were not taking DNA from everyone anyway, because it was so expensive to do these tests at this time. Her father, Roger, began getting very worried that this case was going to go cold, and that's when he got to work saying that he had two choices: stay in bed and pull the covers over his head, or go out and fight the battle. He wasn't going to let this man win because he believed he was going to strike again. Roger was actually able to raise enough money to make the reward go to $50,000, and he persuaded America's Most Wanted to play Ali's episode once again. Meanwhile, another tip had come in about another man. one who lived in this person's neighborhood, and they believed looked a lot like the sketch that Laurel had created. They believed he could be violent and that he also had a criminal record. His name was James Strader. He was a 27-year-old man. They located him at his job in Olathe, which was around 20 minutes away. This was in a mechanic shop, and they went up to James, and he did look like the composite sketch. He was this white male around 6 feet with blue eyes and strawberry blonde hair. Yet James claimed that he knew nothing about Ali or the murder, and he was at work all day on June 18th. So they went to his boss to corroborate the story, and his boss was able to tell them that he was working all day that day. He even knew exactly what he was working on. He had been there with him, and James never left. At this point, investigators began to wonder if this killer was out of town, and that is why no one was coming forward after seeing his picture, because he didn't live in Kansas. But then, in February 2003, 8 months after the murder, a picture came up on the news in Kansas. This man looked a lot like the sketch from Laurel. He was wanted in Kansas and Missouri for sexual assault charges against multiple women, as well as their abductions. He had broken into a former girlfriend's house in Gardner, Kansas, and sexually assaulted her at knife point, making her then go with him to the Lake of the Ozarks. While they were on the road, he then stopped at an abandoned mobile home and tried to break in, and that is when he came across a 14-year-old girl. He then grabbed her at knife point, threw her in the car, and drove them both to a trailer where he forced them to go in and sexually assaulted both of them. They were both released. They called the police, but then a woman in Hutchinson, Kansas came forward saying that the same man had come to her door, and he said he had car trouble. He asked to use the phone, but once he got inside, he brought out a knife and sexually assaulted her. He then abducted her and drove her to Kansas City, where she escaped. This man was revealed to be James Craig Strader, the same man who had been at work at the day of Ali's murder. Or was he? When the investigators who were working on Ali's case heard this, they immediately began in the search for him because James had disappeared. He was wanted, and they found that he also owned a pickup truck. Then on February 10th, an officer in Richfield, Utah, heard over the police radio that a vehicle had just fled a gas station after putting $24 worth of gas in his car and driving away. Now, an officer went searching and pulled over this vehicle that had been seen and ended up going up to the driver's side window. He approached James, who then said that he might as well put the handcuffs on him. When the officer checked his name in the database after hearing this, he found a warrant for James's arrest. He was then charged with rape, kidnapping, and burglary, and a $250,000 bond was set. It turned out that James had a very heavy criminal record prior. He had been sentenced to prison in 1997 for 2 counts of aggravated battery burglary, and while inside, he was in trouble for disrespecting an officer, fighting, and violation of orders. Now, Kansas investigators actually drove all the way to Utah before he could even be extradited because they wanted to talk to him and also get his DNA. That's when they found his DNA through jail that he had been through, and they went ahead and ordered the test. He was saying he knew nothing of Ali's murder, but everything was really looking like it led to him. Ali's family and entire community had the first ounce of hope that they had had in a very long time. But then it was all ripped away. According to DNA, James Strader was not the killer. He was extradited back to Kansas for his trial, and James was given a life sentence for the sexual assaults and given a possibility of parole in 2080. Now, he has been in trouble since while in prison for dangerous contraband, theft, unauthorized dealing or trading, tattoos and body markings, threatening or imitating, and less dangerous contraband and disobeying orders. But back to square one, Roger was working every day to find his daughter's killer. He refused to give up, and this was around the year anniversary of Ali's murder, and Roger decided that he was going to do something even bigger. And when he went to get help with his idea, this person he was speaking to told him it would be free of charge. Soon enough, a billboard was put up with a picture on it. But this was not Ali's picture, as most, crime billboards show the victim's picture. And this was for good reason, because Roger had had this idea that instead of putting the victim's face, they put the sketch of the killer for more people to be able to view him. Also, his truck that he was thought to be driving was posted as well. On bold letters, it said, "Do you know him? Wanted for questioning for murder. $50,000 reward. Call 816-474-TIPS." This was the first time this was done where the killer was actually on the billboard, and it was a genius idea. Ali's father had been driving on the highway one day when he saw this empty billboard and had an idea. He was blown away when Lamar Advertising said it would be no charge at all after finding why he was doing this. Then the tips came flooding in. Thousands were coming forward, and having this billboard on the highway that many used to go to and from work resulted in many individuals who were too busy to sit down and watch a show of America's Most Wanted or, go out and about and see these posters posted up. It gave them the opportunity to have their eyes on this killer and come forward if they had seen his face. They wanted to help identify him, and in fact, one caller had a name they wanted to give them. Teddy Hoover, the man they had spoken to prior for being at the crime scene and who had never gotten back to them with DNA. They tried contacting him only to find out that he had left town. No one had any idea where he had gone. Some said he went to Florida, others to Vegas. He had lived in Kansas City, Kansas, and had a maroon Ford pickup truck. But the only thing they found in Teddy Hoover's name was a driver's license. From there, it was a dead end. Then in 2004, another tip came in that led them to Connecticut. A man was living there with his girlfriend that looked like the sketch. This person said that mail had been going to this home under a name of Benjamin Appleby. The Connecticut Police Department were called by Kansas investigators who asked them to help with this case. When they looked up Benjamin Appleby in their system, they found that he actually had a warrant for his arrest. You see, he had multiple indecent exposure charges as well as risk of injury to a minor and disorderly conduct that had happened in 1998. They went to arrest him for those charges. And meanwhile, the Kansas investigators were on their way for Ali's murder. But it turned out they already knew this man because the man sitting in front of them was Teddy Hoover. The Connecticut investigators had been told this by him on the way to the police station because Benjamin said that he had had trouble in the past and had taken on the name of his childhood friend who had died in an accident, Teddy Hoover. Now he couldn't refuse giving DNA or having his house searched since they had a warrant. He did ask if he could not agree to the DNA, and they said that he could, but they would get it one way or another, and so he did agree. Now at this point, Benjamin was asking for a lawyer. They said that he could have one, but first they asked if some other investigators could talk to him for a while about an unrelated matter than, the charges he had for his warrant that he was being arrested for. He said yes, and Kansas investigators walked in and began to talk to him about the murder of Ali Kemp. Benjamin said that he actually did want to talk about that because he wanted to straighten out some details about when he was questioned back in Kansas. He said he had lied about his name and moved shortly after and started going by his real name again, and that is why he didn't get back to them. But Benjamin also said he was never at the pool that day. Yet his alias, Teddy Hoover, was a name that was written down of the guest who had been at the pool when investigators got there. But that's when he was taken into an interrogation room after an hour of saying he had nothing to do with it. This room was filled with boards and paperwork with his name and pictures all over it. Now, investigators wanted it to seem to Benjamin that they had a copious amount of evidence against him, and that his confession would just be kind of like the cherry on top. As he walked in, his eyes widened, and Kansas investigators then pushed even harder to get him to say something. That is when they began telling him that they had his name and number from that very day, and that is when Benjamin cracked. He said he had lied. He was there. He said he was working in pool maintenance, wanted to check on the facilities in the area, and try to get a contract so he could work for them. He said he had seen Ali in the pump room and thought she was very pretty, and Benjamin was crying at this point during his confession. He said he was trying to flirt with her, but she was completely uninterested. And that's when he blocked her way out the door and began to touch her breasts and her waist. And that is when she punched him in the face. And he was saying that when he touched her, it wasn't hard. And he got really angry because she punched him. And he said he lost it and beat the out of her. That is when they fell, and he began hitting Ali in the head until she was unconscious and began strangling her. But he said he didn't remember what he strangled her with, and at one point he said he didn't remember strangling her at all. But he said that he knew that they believed she was strangled, so he thought he did it. Benjamin said, "I strangled her, but I don't know what I strangled her with. I don't know why I effing did it." He said he then straddled her, took off of her clothes before grabbing the first aid kit for a tube of ointment that he used as a lubricant. Then he couldn't get an erection, so he got up to leave, and that's when he thought he heard Ali breathing. So he said he went back and put a tarp over her body. He said that he didn't think she was dead and didn't want anyone to find her that way. However, it was shown that she had been strangled at multiple different points, and so some believed that he went back not to cover her up, but when he heard she was still breathing, to strangle her once again to make sure she was dead. That's when he headed out and heard honking, and he then waved at the best friend of the girl he had just killed. He then left after that, only to come back when investigators were there looking at the crime scene. Then the DNA tests came back, matching Benjamin Appleby. Laurel also came down to the police station to see a lineup of men to see if she would pick out Benjamin, and she did. They had found Ali's killer. Now, investigators did believe that Benjamin would go ahead and plead guilty to spare the Kemp family of having to go to a trial, but he ended up pleading not guilty and putting them through it. And on December 5th of 2005, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to a hard 50 without parole and 228 months for the sexual assault. Now, when the Kemp family began giving their victim impact statement, Benjamin actually asked to leave the courtroom. Roger said, "People talk about closure. I don't see closure. He's still breathing. Ali's not breathing. I have a problem with that."
I found her. She was beaten. She was strangled. She was battered. He murdered her because he attempted to attack her, and it's very difficult for me to say. Rape her, killed her, and then he tried to rape her again.
But this wasn't the end, because in 2019, Benjamin appealed, saying that the hard 50 was decided by a judge and not a jury, and that's illegal. This is because the hard 50 meant that there was no possibility of parole before he hit those 50 years. He also said that the attempted sexual assault charge is a multiplicity and double jeopardy. Now, multiplicity is the charging of a single offense in several counts of a complaint of information, and the reason multiplicity must be considered is that it creates the potential for multiple punishments for a single offense in violation of the double jeopardy clause. Benjamin was saying that they arose from the same offense, making it double jeopardy, the murder and the sexual assault, or the attempted sexual assault, and he has been fighting for a reduced sentence. Now, Roger and the entire Kemp family are horrified that he could be back out on the streets to hurt somebody else, and Benjamin was also thought to be a paranoid schizophrenic and have intermittent explosive disorder, or IED, and he said that these were actually used against him at the trial and not for him. So Dr. David George Hugh was brought in on this appeal, and he claimed that something had kindled inside of Benjamin, and this was the enormous rage that was way out of proportion to anything Ali could have said or done, that this basically couldn't have been a premeditated murder. Benjamin also claimed he was exposed to violence, substance abuse, lawless behavior, and abandonment when he was a child.
And I never ever wanted to say his name. I never said it but once, and I said I'm never going to say that Benjamin Appleby's name again, ever. And I'm going to say it a lot now. Benjamin Appleby, as a murderer, he deserves to be in jail for 50 years. We have someone that goes against our society, that goes against our laws, that doesn't care about the law until he's caught. And then he wants every right under the book that he's so willing to take away from someone else. He silenced Allie's voice. She has no voice in this.
However, prosecutors argued that the state law doesn't apply to this case, and so the, hard 50 is legal. They also said that the crime was proven to be premeditated by the sheer amount of abuse and beatings that Ali went through, and the starting and the stopping of the strangulation in Ali's death. It wasn't some sudden strangulation that he just couldn't stop. He continued going back for more. They also found it didn't matter if his IED made him prone to rages and explosions. It didn't change the outcome of this sentence, and this appeal was denied. Roger said, "We can't let Benjamin Appleby back out on the streets. He's caused nothing but hurt, pain, suffering, and tragedy to so many that he's touched, and death in Ali's case." Now, the Kansas Supreme Court did rule that his sexual assault conviction was a multiplicity, and the 220 months were taken off of his sentence, but he does still have those hard 50 years. It will be 2055 when he is eligible for parole. Now, I do live in Kansas, and I can tell you that although I was too young to remember this case, my parents still remember it to this day. I went up to them, all I said was her first and last name, and they immediately could tell me exactly what happened to her. That is how much that this affected the entire state. This is 19 years later, and they still knew Ali Kemp. And we are complete strangers to this family, so I can't even imagine how the Kemp family feels. But they now have a huge legacy in Ali's name, and they have actually started a program called TAKE Defense, or the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation. This is a program that actually helps women to be able to learn self-defense. It's self-defense training, and it's completely free. Roger said that he started it because he realized that the world had changed and women needed to know how to protect themselves. The first class was a group of 12 individuals, and today thousands of women have taken this class and have learned from the instructors that Roger has created because of Ali. Because this class is free, they do rely on donations to keep them going, and I will have them linked below. I will be donating to them. I think it is such a good cause to support, and I think that using your tragedy for something helpful, something good, something beautiful and pure like this is one of the most beautiful things that someone could do.
Here in Tomahawk Park in Leawood, you'll find this statue of a little girl. It's part of a large memorial built to honor the life of Ali Kemp. And everywhere you look around here, you'll find examples of Ali Kemp's dedication to friendship and love.
A true friend listens to what you say. Life's a sculpture, friends are clay.
The benches at this place are all inscribed with poetry.
When life gets hard and goals seem far, it's then you'll know who your true friends are.
Every word written by Ali Kemp when she was only 14.
Every day, think about Allie, of course.
So it seemed the perfect place to speak with her father, Roger Kemp, who now 10 years after Allie's death still thinks about her thoughtfulness, her kindness. She was, he says, a delight. And her kindness extends to this very day with a gift of empowerment.
2 hands to always 2 on 1. Which way are you going?
Not long after his daughter's murder, Roger Kemp launched a program teaching defense techniques for women.
If you poke somebody in the eye, this is probably their first reaction.
Nationwide, nearly 50,000 women, young and old, have taken the class.
Makes me feel very, very good every time I see one of our classes.
And it just keeps growing.
Keeps growing.
Roger Kemp says it's impossible for him to think about his daughter without thinking about her big, booming laugh. And he had plenty of chances to hear it, he says, because it always erupted after he had done something silly.
I think Ali would be so proud of her family for what they have done in her honor, and Roger said, if we can save one life out there, I don't care what it costs, this whole program will be worth it. And I am so grateful that I came across this case, because although it is solved now and I wasn't able to find it and help out with it when they needed that help, at least her legacy can run on, and now so many more people can hear about the beautiful woman she was and the horrific thing that was done to her, not because we want to talk about the killer, but because we want to know how strong she was, how much of a fighter she was, and that just because this evil person got to her doesn't take any of the good away from her. Ali didn't deserve this, and neither does any woman who has been attacked or killed by a man due to them not being able to handle the rejection or the word no. Please remember that the link will be down below on where to donate to this self-defense class. I think it is incredible. I, in fact, am thinking about going to take a class since it is here in Kansas, and I encourage you to do the same in, wherever you live. See if there is some sort of class that you can get into just to be prepared. Although we shouldn't have to make up for the fact that evil people exist, unfortunately, we do. And we have to make sure we're doing what we can to be safe. So please stay safe out there, and don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Bye.